Linton. Welcome, everybody. So welcome to the Root Social Justice Center Families United event. I appreciate all of you showing up today. Before we get started, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the culture we would like to set for the event. So at the Root Social Justice Center, we have a program called Families United. And in Families United, we've had these agreements here that we operate by. And so we're just going to use these agreements within this space as well for today to sort of set the culture. One of the reasons why we set the culture is because sometimes we don't know how to act. And we understand that we're in a really vulnerable space, that there are people who have been impacted by the Vermont DCF system here. There are people who work within the Vermont DCF system. There are people who advocate for people who are affected by the Vermont DCF system. There are people who are curious and wondering about the Vermont DCF system. There are people who are foster, adoptive, respite, and other caregivers within the DCF system. So we are all impacted in some way in this space, but we may be impacted differently. This space is about centering those who are most impacted. And what we mean by that in our space today are those people who have directly been impacted by DCF, which means they themselves or their children have had to interface with the system. Maybe they've gotten their children taken away, maybe they've gotten them back, maybe they haven't. When I say most impacted, those are the people that I'm talking about, and this is the event that will center around them. So the culture is not centered towards the system, it's not centered towards the professionals that might be in this room, it's not even centered towards the advocates or the people who are giving us information today. It is centered for those who have been the most impacted in the space, and we want to operate underneath of that culture. So these are some of the agreements that we've had when we have Families United. One is oppression exists. In the space of the root, we do not play the oppression wheel. We understand that oppression exists, which means patriarchy, sexism, racism, all those things exist. And so many of us experience many of those things on a different level. We're not going to play which one is worse, which one is better, oh, who is this, but we're going to acknowledge that it exists, that we have it in us. And just because we may identify in whatever category we do, does not mean we can't perpetuate that oppression in this space. And so we want to acknowledge that it exists and it's not up for debate in this space. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There's a lot of people, as an advocate for people who have been impacted by the DCF system, a lot of people are, when they tell their stories, are like, oh, that didn't happen, I don't believe you, that's outrageous, that would never happen in Vermont. Just because you may not have experienced it or you don't see it does not mean it isn't true, it does not mean it doesn't exist. We are going to take people for their value of their experiences and stories, and that is never up for debate in this particular space today. We are all here for our collective liberation. We are in this together. I'm hoping that you're here because you are interested in being a change maker. One of the questions up there, which we'll go over later, is about, are you ready to be a change maker? We want you to be a change maker. Your voice matters in changing the system so that we're actually all supporting families in Vermont the way we want to. We will not be pitted against each other. So in this system and in the world, of course, we're pitted against each other, right? Oh, well, my addiction is worse than your racism. My gender is more important than your disability. We go around and around and we pit each other against each other, even within the people who are most impacted, even within the larger systems. But we're not going to pit each other against each other. We all have our lived experiences and they're all valid. We are here to change the system. That goes without saying. I'm not here for kicks and giggles. This is about changing the system and making systemic change. We all have something to give. We all have something to learn. I am not the expert. I am just somebody who's here that can give knowledge, understanding, and listening. As well, I'm also here to really learn. I have something to learn from each and every single one of you in the space, and we all have ability to learn from each other. So I ask you to listen with open ears as much as you can. Confidentiality in this space. So what we say, now this is being videoed, and so I say share only what you want to share. because typically in our Families United space, we have a confidential space, and we use the term, what we share here stays here, what we learn goes out. So I encourage you to talk about all the things you learned here, but even the stories, even if they might go on the film, keep those stories to your heart and respect the stories they are. And if you hear somebody's story, check in with them. Don't share their stories without checking in with them. That's not okay. If you are moved by somebody's story, then you make that relationship with that person and you ask them if you can use their story or understand more about their experience. Assume good intentions. We kind of know assume makes a yak out of you and me, right? So we kind of vary on that, but we also want to say that we're hoping that people are showing up with good intentions. We operate from a trauma-informed approach. As I mentioned before, this is a most impacted-centered space. We all got trauma probably in our lives, but people who have experienced the system in the way that they have, the trauma that they are experiencing isn't over because they might not have their children, or they might have got their children back, or they might have moved forward in their lives. That trauma lives within us, and it's very serious, and we have to acknowledge that people are being vulnerable, and from that vulnerability comes this deep trauma that many of us have experienced. Be honest. So we try in our group to tell people to be honest, because if we're going to help you, we need you to be honest. So be as honest as you can. If somebody wants to call you in on something, be as honest as you can, or say I don't know, or this is really like this. And we meet people where they're at. Everybody's at different stages, different points in their lives, so let's meet people where they're at. So raise your hand if you want to agree to the agreements and stay in the space with us tonight. Great. Okay, if you don't, there's the door right there. And but it looks like everybody raised their hands for people on the film. Some people know. So those are the agreements of setting up the space of the culture. We will, if for some reason somebody does get out of hand, we are prepared to either take you to the side or maybe ask you to leave. We want to be respectful as we can in this space, understanding that people have all different types of experiences. The goals of the meeting. We have goals of the meeting, which are right over here as well for you to read, but I'm going to read them out loud, is to build awareness and give information to the public. We have presenters here today, as well as most impacted people here today, to talk about their experiences and what they're working on and how we might be possibly able to get involved and be those change makers that I hope we all want to be. We're here to build relationships and connections. Everything is about relationships and connection. So we want to make sure that this is just not an opportunity for exchange of information. This is your opportunity to meet people in the flesh who work in the systems, who've been impacted by the systems, who are working to improve the systems and build those relationships with us in this room today. We are also here to take action steps. We're hoping that whatever information you find out today, or whatever information you don't find out today that makes you curious about how to move forward, that you keep that curiosity and that you join these change maker spaces in the future after this meeting. Some of the ideas we have for our goals are to create a coalition of people who support families and want to change legislation and policies that harm families in Vermont, and to seek for accountability in the Vermont DCS system. That is one of the goals that we would like to achieve. To explore ways to create a network of volunteers who are interested in supporting families in need through grassroots advocacy, respite care, community safety, and financial support. And the third is to build a robust group of most impacted folks, peers, to support each other and to create Families United in different towns across the state, connecting us all statewide. So we have this group, Families United, here in Brattleboro, but we want them all over the state. I get calls, and I know many of you who are in the crowd who do advocacy for people who are impacted get calls from all over the state. This is an issue from all over the state. It's not a Brattleboro issue. And we want to not only be connecting with each other in this community, but connecting statewide. So those are the goals today. And I think that, let me see, okay. So I want to introduce the event by just saying again, community safety, trauma, I mentioned that. It takes a village to raise a child. I used to think that saying was kind of dumb. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm like, very honestly, I was like, that's some other people's kind of stuff, okay? Like, it takes a village to raise a child. And then I realized what it really meant. I had this epiphany. And that epiphany came from advocating for so many parents who are impacted by the system and realizing, oh my God, we need us all. We need those teachers, we need those grandmas, we need those social workers, we need those org people, we need the person on the street who smiles at us. You know, we need all these people to really help raise our children. And so let's remind us that just whether we're parents or not, it's all our job to help raise a child. Vulnerability. We're going to be vulnerable in this space, and I'm hoping that not only the people who are most impacted are going to share a little bit about themselves, but I'm hoping that those who are presenters today are going to share a little bit about their stories as well. And again, people are only going to share what they feel comfortable sharing today. Again, build those relationships, maybe they'll share more with you. And also be mindful that we only have so much time, so people will not be sharing like lengthy stories, but they'll give you a little snippet of who they might be. Back in 2018, we had a Families United event where we invited Commissioner Ken Schatz to be here. It was an absolutely monumentous event. It made a huge yes. Snaps for that, snaps for that. There are some people that are in this space who were in that space then, and it was an amazing event. And a lot of things happened during that time. We have not stopped fighting, we have not stopped advocating, and we have not stopped taking action. That was just one of the events of many that we continue to hope to have. And I will encourage you, we are going to put it back up on our website for you all to be able to view it again, because it was videoed, and you can check it out, but it made a lot of impact in many people's lives. Let's see, I want to thank, first of all, I want to thank the most impacted people in this room. So let's get Then I want to thank the presenters for showing up. Let's snap for the presenters, snap for the presenters. I want to thank the room staff for doing numerous labor to make this happen. I want to thank our child care person. I want to thank BCTV. I want to thank Tito's and Ramutos for providing food. And I want to thank all of you in the audience for taking a Friday night out where you could be doing something other than being here tonight. This is how the agenda is going to work. I want to first say that Amy Rose, who is part of Voices for Vermont's Children, is unable to be here. Her family is having some tough moments and she needed to be with them. So she really apologizes for not being able to be here, but she has been in phenomenal collaboration with the Root Social Justice Center, Families United, and Most Impacted People, working on amazing legislation, being an advocate, having a voice, centering people, working on dismantling white supremacy within herself and her organization and the work that she does. And I just want to give her a shout out to her because we are ever so grateful for her to be a part of our team, and we hope that you and your family feel better, and we love you. So I just want to say snaps to Amy, sorry you can't be here. And now I'm just going to introduce myself, and then I'm going to pass it to the next person to be introduced. So I wrote my stuff down because I like to talk a lot. So first, I have a few questions that I've asked everybody to answer, so you'll kind of get that feeling as we come up here. So first of all, my name is Shela Linton. I use she, her pronouns. I am the co-founder of the Root Social Justice Center, currently the executive director, co-founder of Families United, and the current member of the Oversight Commission on Youth, Children, and Families. I identify as a Black Indigenous femme, born and raised in Brattleboro, raised my children here, and my child is raising her children here. I am an activist, community organizer, and advocate, and I've been advocating for families impacted by the Vermont DCF system for over 20 years. I have an extended family who have been severely impacted by the Vermont DCF system. I got into this work because I was advocating for folks in Vermont on a variety of issues. DCF kept coming up as an area of need and people were reaching out for support, so I decided to help. I learned some of the systems and some of the players and began advocating for families to help ensure their rights, understanding of the system, the treatment they were enduring, the processes they were going through, and access to resources. After working with dozens of folks throughout the state, we realized this was an extreme systemic issue and decided to create the Families United group so impacted people could have peer support and organize for change. Families One of the questions is, what has been rewarding about the work that I do? Families feeling heard, validated and being supported, peers being able to support each other and advocate for change, folks realizing that the system is broken and being willing to change it. What has been heartbreaking for me doing this work has been the devastation of families being separated, the trauma that the whole family and community faces, and folks realizing that, and then the lack of the system is not working for families, the lack of advocacy for families, and the aftermath of what is left behind, which is a broken community. Why am I here today? I'm here today to bring people together, to get informed, to build relationships, and build an infrastructure of people who are willing to support changing the system and supporting impacted families. Families United is here to stay, and I want people to join the group if you are the most impacted person, and I want those of you who are not to be the change makers we need to take action today. So I welcome all of you of being in the space today, and I thank you so much. And I'm going to welcome our first presenter up, which is Allison. I'm going to welcome up, and if we could give some snaps. Allison is the most impacted person, and I asked you to be gracious and loving as she talks a little bit about her experience and who she is.
Can you keep the mask on all the time?
Nope, you can take the mask off while I talk. People, when you're talking, please feel free to take the mask off.
Sorry. It's stuck. Hello, my name is Allison Billadu, and I also have written down what I'm going to say. I'm she, her. I'm one of many impacted by DCS, starting from the early years as a child in custody into my adult life. I'm here today to help raise awareness in my community to how broken the system is and how it needs to change. I'm here to help make positive change in the system. I volunteer as an advocate in my spare time to help those in need. No one was there for me as a child, so I want to make sure that never happens to anyone else ever again. For a brighter future for our children and families. And it's best to start with a trauma-informed based approach. A little side note, something I'd like to change today is when I was 18 years old, I was in the system for a short time. My mom was in a coma. She was only mom, you know, no other family. So it's very powerful, you know, story. So pausing for a moment. But when I signed out at 18 years old, you know, you're free to start your life, whatever. I couldn't wait to leave out the door. You know, later on, I had children of my very own. And I got harassed, you know, since day one when they were born. And I didn't realize something. When I signed that contract when I left, I was enabling myself to be listed as a risk to be any kind of guardian. So if you've ever been in state's custody, you're basically always going to be labeled as that, a potential risk, and it's just not right. I hope someday we can be viewed like anyone else. Like we didn't have control, you know, to be in this system and they'd be traumatized. But we have our choice in how we react and how we choose to live our lives. And it's not easy. Hopefully there can be resources out there to help kids that need help, that are being mistreated wherever they may be, you know, instead of having to deal with it by themselves. You know, brighter tomorrow. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Allison.
I'm next going to ask Melanie to come up.
Melanie is another impacted person by the system.
Hello, I'm Melanie Hudson. I helped co-found Families United in 2016 or so. Yes. She, her is my pronouns, and I am the aftermath. I'm all alone now. My 4 girls were separated. Their father, biological father of all of my girls, just passed away in October, October 6th. So, hasn't even been that long, less than 4 months, right? Yeah, Shela came to the service, and Allison came, you came. They were taken at ages 4, 6, and 8. And they're now 16, 14, and 12. But my oldest is 20, and I've had some contact with her. I'm sorry, I'm shaking, but the state of Vermont put them up for adoption pretty quickly. And we did everything humanly possible not to let that happen. We even went through 2 trials, and a lot of people wouldn't know that unless I told them. Like I just went away. No, we went through 2 trials. And they basically used length of time. What would you say?
Yeah.
It's just a mess. Length of time basically, because they didn't find anything that couldn't be solved or worked on, you know. So, and I was harassed. They seem to really want my kids. I was harassed as well. I wasn't in the system myself, but they seem to want my kids in the system. I'm in the same house. Well, I moved out. I gave it to the father, but it's still there. Now someone else is going to be in there, but I have the same house for them since 2012. And they're in all different towns. Lacey fought to see us as we fought to see her, and that took some time, but we never gave up, and we did see her for year after year towards the end. Now we're kind of estranged for different reasons, but she did come to the service, and I have seen her the past couple weeks. She's 20, but it's been hard on all of us. I guess she sees our oldest sister, she sees one of her sisters that I know of sometimes. So they use length of time. I still have the same house. I did everything I could, so didn't Craig. He worked all the time. He worked like crazy, remember? Of course you do. But yeah, he worked and worked and worked, and they seem to discredit that, but they discredited anything good that we did or tried to do. So, and I miss my girls every day, and so didn't he. He just had a different way of showing it. This man, he was a man, you know. I think that's it. I'm here for awareness and education. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. I just want to give a pause and just breathe. Just take a minute to breathe and to hear these stories. You know, there are other people that have been impacted, and these are just 2 of hundreds and thousands of people who have been impacted. So let's just take a moment of silence for those parents, for those children, for those people who have been directly impacted. Let's just take like 10 seconds. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Melanie, for your vulnerability, for your bravery. It is not easy to stand up here and to be vulnerable when you've been harassed, when you've been judged, when you've gone through so much trauma. I have so much respect for the both of you, so thank you for sharing your story and being here tonight. I want to welcome up our next presenter, which is Matthew Bernstein and Lauren Higbee. These 2 individuals are currently the advocates and deputy advocates of the Child, Youth, and Family Advocates at the Office of Child, Youth, and Family Advocate. This office just started, I believe, last January, and they can correct me if I'm wrong. So I welcome both Matthew and Lauren to come up here to the stage. You can sit, stand, whatever's good for you.
We're a talk show if we sit. Either way, sure.
And there's a table that you need, and you can put your.
Oh. Well, this is just like some props. It's all right.
Put it here, just in case others.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, so maybe just trying to think of how to do this. Maybe we can do the 8 questions each, and then I can talk about the office a little more. Sure. Okay. So sorry. Hello, everybody. My name is Matthew Bernstein. My pronouns are he, him. Oh, you can borrow this.
Oh, it's okay.
My pronouns are he, him. I am a teacher, a student, a lawyer, and as of about January 1st is close enough, 2023, the Child, Youth, and Family Advocate for the state of Vermont, which is a new office that we'll talk about a little bit more in a little bit. So who I am, I guess the things I want to say about who I am are that I've always sort of been somebody who's walked through life holding, I was going to say dual, but it's more than dual, but I would say conflicting identities in different ways. Being really good at school and struggling in school. Being really privileged and also feeling like sometimes, because of identities, religion, being Jewish, I'm somebody who has a disability, even though I haven't always identified as such. And just somebody who struggles with mental health. I've always both walked in privilege as a white male into rooms and spaces and opportunities, and also really had a sense for that's not guaranteed for me, but more importantly, I think for others. And so in terms of academic and professional work, I've always been drawn to folks who really have struggled. And some of the stories, similarly to some of the stories we've heard tonight, and been drawn to the disability community even before I identified as somebody with a disability, etc. So I guess that's a simple summary. And I think the next question is why did I get into this work? And I guess I sort of touched on that. For me, I think some of it was the power of my own education, and being, again, that comes partly with privilege, but also just the number of doors that opened to me as I progressed in my education and sort of learned about the power of the written word, and the power of the way our society and culture values certain things, names of degrees, certain skills, and also having, again, that sort of that contradiction is being conscious of how that works, and also understanding that doesn't function in a way that makes sense so much of the time. For example, when I went to college and studied about United States history, when I studied the kind of United States history that I really wanted to study, I learned about the history of colonialism and slavery in this country, and understood, and I'm still understanding every day about how it is past and also present, and how our country has never really had a reckoning with that history and how we've gotten here today. And I think that's especially true in child welfare. And I think Vermont is a center of Vermont is one of the places I've lived in, a lot of different places, and I think it's a place that has some of the least amount of self-reckoning, and I think has the most conflicted, from what I see as an outsider, vision of itself.
Wow.
In contradiction with with what I see around me and with what I read about the history here. And there's one book that just came out this week called Vermont for the Vermonters, which is about the history of disability in this state and our state systems, etc., and really intersects with child welfare. And I think the more our history comes out, the more that contradiction becomes bigger. I'm going to take all the time, sorry. So, I'm not going to. So anyway, it can get pretty wrapped up in that, but I think that's a summary of that. What's rewarding and heartbreaking about this work? I really love, like as a lawyer, I really love the code switching and cultural translation piece. I really love working with folks like in this room and then figuring out how to say the magic words in a courtroom or to people who hold power to achieve justice, right? And I love the ability to walk, to wear a suit and sit on the floor with a 2-year-old as part of my job, and then like wear a suit and be the white guy with the tie, as I like to say. And so that's really rewarding. And I guess like thinking of making big change, like our office, I really want to, we're seeking to both work with individuals and also create big systemic change at a high level. And so that to me is really rewarding, the opportunity to make big systemic change and also to work with people every day, because I enjoy people, and especially kids. And what's heartbreaking, the stories we've already heard, this, even as a lawyer, I think I think about lawyers as being very powerful. As a lawyer representing kids, I'm just sort of used to, generally speaking, used to losing, right? And what that means is not, it just means that like the deck is always feels stacked against you, right? And I think it's really hard to, I think what's hardest is to hear multiple generations of folks who have been drawn into systems and not feeling like they can't overcome. So those are the hard days, and the days in which I feel like I don't have any power. It's just the other identities, the non-power. And then I guess here today, what we've been working on, I think, maybe I'll pause on that. But here today, because I think when you become a lawyer and when you work for the government, you sort of, on its face, that's a systemic insider. And so I think it's important to label that. In other words, I'm not like an activist working on the outside to change the system from the outside. I am a system functionary working on the inside. And again, the other side of that identity is something that has always been with me, is the collective action piece is still there. And I think the root in Shela and Families United and everybody in this room, to me, that's that collective action and that community organizing and that advocate outsider mentality and ways of being is really important to me still, even as an insider. And so I think like to create connections there and to be somebody who does work for the government, and I think as somebody who probably naively believes that government really should represent people and that government should function for people, I think like maintaining that through line with grassroots organizing, with people who are organizing and doing the work themselves, because nobody else will, if they look around and see a problem and then realize they have to work for themselves, I think that's the kind of spirit that I love and want to venerate, and even as an insider. So I will leave it there.
Can I see the question?
Please.
I have it on my phone and I don't want to get up again.
I wrote down all the answers.
I'm going to copy them.
This is Laura.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, sorry. Here's
Hi,
the baton.
everyone. I'm Lauren Higbee. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the deputy advocate, working with Matthew every day with the Office of the Child, Youth, and Family Advocate. And that is a new position. I'm new to it as of June of 2023. And still working on what that means, what the day-to-day is, what the big roles are. But I want to focus on who I am because it's relevant to the role and where I hope we can take this new office. I grew up in Vermont. Deep roots here in Vermont, even in the Brattleboro area. My uncle went to the Austin school. He, jumped at the Harris Hill. if you all see the yellow building next to the library here, that was my Nana's house, like my great Nana's house before, right? Like, so I have deep roots here, but then also in farm country in Addison County. And so I'm connected to this work because of my lived experience. Even though we have such deep connections, I like to say I was an SRS kid, right? So before it was the Department for Children and Families, it was Social Services Rehabilitation, something like that. SRS, Social Rehabilitation. Tell him, Larry.
Department of Social and Rehabilitation
Right.
Services.
And there was substance use, domestic violence, you know, all those, the themes they throw at you that leave you at risk for child welfare involvement, right? In my family, in my experience, but I had a home base, right? I had the family, I had the kin connected to me that kept me safe in any way, the capital S and the lowercase s, and so those experiences are so invaluable to this role, and then as soon as I knew I wanted to be a social worker, my first internship was at a child welfare agency in Chicago, and it just, you know, stars align or something, everything just comes together, and it's like, oh, my lived expertise plus my schooling, like, this is what I'm meant to do. And so I've worked in child protection, child welfare in Chicago, Philadelphia, and in the state of Vermont. And that has been, it's been really interesting to see the different state systems, because Vermont is interesting in that it's a state intervention, right? DCF is a state entity. But if we think of child welfare, child protection as a community issue, then it's almost a misalignment of the intervention, right? And so that, I think, is a real struggle that we have here, and needs to be named, I'd say, more and more. And there's a lot. What's rewarding? I mean, you get to work with kids, you get to work with families, right? And that's also what's heartbreaking, right? I distinctly remember my first reunification of a mom with her 3 children, and I also distinctly remember my first termination of parental rights trial, and I still hold those families that I worked with even these years after. And so that's both rewarding and heartbreaking is the work. And let's see, I'm here today because of everyone I know in this room, and connected to the area, connected to the work, and really the vision for Vermont and where we want to move it. Because what's really exciting, I find, is we are a small state, and so we can really revolutionize where we go here. And I think that's what's most exciting. I'll leave it there as well, and we'll continue with our office.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, go for it.
How are we on time?
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do what you need to do.
Okay. I mean, I will try to be brief because it's easy to talk forever. So our office was created by the Vermont legislature through the efforts of a lot of people, some of whom are in this room, of course. So, yeah, and I mean, and so that's been actually very cool to experience, and realize that there's so many hopes and dreams. It's both the amazing thing and the scary thing, and the sort of the heavy thing is just how many people are invested in really these issues, right? But the office too. So anyway, the office was created. Governor Scott signed the bill that the legislature passed in 2023. I shouldn't look surprised. And so the office officially came into being on January 1 of 2023. I started at the end of February. Lauren started in June. And so we're honestly still ramping up. We don't have now we join the ranks of all the other understaffed state agencies. So, we don't have, we've asked for more positions, we don't have them yet. So we're, it's sort of everything all at once. So anyway, the main things we do are systemic advocacy and individual advocacy. That's the simplest way to break it down. And the issues we work on are centered in child welfare and juvenile justice, but also brought into any child, youth, or family receiving services directly from DCF, any part of DCF, or through funds provided by DCF. So that could be somebody living in a hotel through the Economic Services Division. It could be, the core of the work is child welfare, the family services work, kids in foster care, in facilities, etc., and also in the juvenile justice system. And so we are within state government, but we are independent, which means we're outside any chain of command. I was nominated by the governor and confirmed by the Senate to a 4-year term, which means absent essentially serious misconduct, nobody can really fire me for 4, like in 4 years the governor can reappoint, now it's 3 years, can reappoint, TikTok. The governor can reappoint somebody else, but that's important not for job security for me as much as it is because we truly can be independent then, right? Like even if we are really making folks mad by speaking truth to power, then we still get to do that for at least 3, until the term is up. But our job, that sounds a little bit confrontational. Our job really is to collaborate with everybody and to ensure that, it's not just that the law is followed, but it's, that there is a voice, really, is the way I think of it. Our statute doesn't talk about us overseeing DCF, even though some folks frame it like that, and even I used to. But what it does talk about is advocating on behalf of, it's in the name, right, advocate, and really being a voice for folks who haven't had a sufficient voice that's independent from DCF. There's also a public information component of it, so our website is slowly growing. So, an example of that might be helping folks understand the court process if their kids are in foster care, or a kid understand the court process, or making sure that youth placed out of state are have what they need and are really, able to fight to get back here if that's what they want. It usually is. So that's an important thing. And then we have these community interaction pieces, which are really important. So we have an oversight commission that Shela sits on, and Amy, who Shela mentioned, and anyone else in this room? Am I forgetting anybody? The oversight commission? Not in this room. Okay, thank you. Good. Phew. And then we have an advisory council as well, which is made up of impacted people that Melanie is on. Thank you. And so that is really like, the idea is that it's made up of 9 people who are impacted by DCF, and it's really meant to be so that the office is listening, right? It's not us telling them what to do, or it's not like a board of directors. It's more like making sure that voice has a formal structure. So that's cool, and we're getting that going too. It's been a little bumpy just finding a time to meet lately. You know how that goes. But anyway, so that's been really awesome, and that's one of the things that really drew me to this office. Do you want to just say anything I forgot? Oh, records maybe? What did I forget?
I think you mentioned the main pieces and the individual advocacy, but the way it's named in our statute is that we receive complaints about DCF and then sort of triage them or prioritize them as needed to respond to, and that could look many different ways. I think that part of the statute is critical, and it goes into what I think you were going to mention as well. That could be us doing a records request so we can see the history of involvement or get an understanding. It could be reviewing policy and practice with families and understanding court procedures as well that you mentioned. So families and youth and children can be well informed about sort of what the next steps are, or what the purpose of one hearing is, or what a shared parenting meeting is, or an FSP, all things like that. And it's been really interesting in the beginning to see where the referrals are coming from. And we have a lot from GALs, directly from grandparents and parents themselves. Some youth have reached out directly as well. And I just thought I'll probably add our number on the board as well, Sheila. So that, the individual complaints are essential really as well to build our systems advocacy, right? Because there are so many themes within them and so many shared experiences that the families have that really build, the direction we're walking.
I just have a question,
Yeah.
point of clarification. Did you say GAL, just breaking down the...
Guardian ad litem, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And just for my own understanding,
Yeah.
the majority of the referrals you're getting are from...
Oh, it's just naming one referral source.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah.
The majority are probably from parents and
Parents and
grandparents.
grandparents and providers directly. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, definitely.
But we would like to, the kids like the youth who are in residential treatment programs, for example, I think are some of the folks who we would like to talk to the most, who without us trying to, we would naturally talk to the least. Like who have as of right now are the least likely to call us, and that's partly on us. We have to get out there and get our number out there. So that's a really important group is for me, for both of us, I know, but is talking to youth. And yeah, we have our first, I brought some stuff here. We have a couple full copies of our first annual report, which we have to do every December. So we just did the first one. It's long. So we have a couple copies. If you really want to read it, you can have one of those. But I also printed out a bunch of just the executive summary and all the recommendations. So those we have more of. And so please take one of those. Our website is childadvocate.vermont.gov. So all of those are also there. And of course, our phone number and contact information is there now. So yeah, I don't want to take up a whole lot more time. I'd be happy to talk with anybody, or if there's any questions now, or we can just pass the baton and let others go, and then we can talk later.
So no, stay. Anything else you all want to say? Okay.
Thank you.
So let's.
Thank you, Sheila. How about thank you, Sheila?
Okay. So I forgot to mention earlier that you might have gotten index cards or you might have questions. Now is the time to either write on your index card a question if you don't, and you can either stand up and ask your question, or you can give me your index card and we'll bring up the question up here. Or if you just want to ask any of these people questions right now. If you don't right now, holding onto your index card, and afterwards, if you feel like, oh, I don't want to do this right now, we'll put the name of the person that you have a question for on the index card, and we will get it to them, and they will email you back your answer to your question. If you don't feel safe, or you just don't know what you want to ask right now, that goes for anybody who has presented today, okay? So right now, I'm just going to open it up for a few minutes to see if there's any questions that you have for Matthew and Lauren. And they can be questions, but they also can be concerns. So if you have a concern, this isn't the time to do your complaint, but you can definitely do that. We'll put the contact number and everything up there. But if you have questions or clarifications or curiosity, please open the floor and anybody can ask a question. Just feel free to stand up. Go ahead. Deb.
I have a concern.
Just speak up loudly for me.
Okay, I have two concerns. Number one, working with families who are coming from different cultures and having different, real clash of what's acceptable in terms of parenting and discipline. And that I've seen a number of reports, being submitted and substantiated because of different cultural expectations. I'd like to see them be able to actually hire people from different cultures who could work with families and understand this is a whole huge, shift. Secondly, I'm also really concerned about how little those who are impacted, whether it's youth or families, their parents, know about what their rights are. Yeah, I would love to see many, trainings for folks statewide so that folks can learn like what do you do, you know? Lastly, another concern that I have is for parents who might be limited, whether it's, developmental or language barriers. And I've seen kids taken away with parents who are really had so much love and needed a different kind of support that wasn't there. And so that's just another concern I work with. And I would love to talk, I have lots of youth who would love to be heard about their experiences. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll just say briefly, I think those are three really important concerns that are things that we have heard from multiple people and we are working on. The different cultural issues is huge. The Know Your Rights piece, I'm relabeling it Know Your Rights, and that's, we have a part of our website that we have not published yet because there's nothing, we haven't developed it yet, but Know Your Rights types of trainings is exactly what we want to do long term. And then barriers like you described are to parents who, as you said, have a lot of love but who need support is a huge one too. And there's a whole section of our report on people with disabilities. We have talked to a number of folks who, even 20 years later, are still trying to process that piece and sort of telling us, I just needed a little bit of help, right? And what happened was I haven't seen my kids since then, right? And so that's, those are really important issues. I really appreciate you raising those. And when kids want to talk, that's a high priority for us. So please, and by kids, I use that term, as I call myself, young people. So please reach out. Add to that.
I would say that if there are specific mediums for outreach of Know Your Rights that you've been successful with, I would say share that with us, and that way, if it's on YouTube, a YouTube channel, or a simple reel on Instagram, I think I'm allowed to do that. I think that's also helpful to hear from people working directly with you, and from the youth themselves, how is this going to reach the most youth? And so thinking creatively in that way is exciting too.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions, thoughts, or things they want to put in the space for Lauren and Matthew specifically?
I'm just curious, does this office exist in other states? I'm from New Hampshire, right?
Yeah.
So is there a New Hampshire?
There is.
There is.
Oh, there is?
Yeah,
Okay.
New Hampshire Office of the Child Advocate, just OCA, yeah.
Okay.
There's a big model for our office, actually. In the legislative process.
Some other states have it, like an ombuds model or ombudsman office, and that's the name of it. But I'd say the majority of other states have it.
It's like
Vermont
30-something
yeah.
child.
And what is it called again in New Hampshire?
It's called the Office of the Child Advocate, OCA. I think it's oca.nh.gov. And since you asked, I'll say that literally on the way driving here, one of my many excuses for being so late, I apologize, was that I was actually trying to get in touch with them. It's 4:30 on a Friday, but there was an issue where there were some kids that they had an emergency situation. They were from New Hampshire, but they were with a relative in Vermont, and New Hampshire DCYF was on their way. This was an hour ago, right, to pick up the kids, and the folks in Vermont, the family members, called us and said, we want the kids to stay here. And so we partner quite a bit, is my point, with other states, mainly New Hampshire actually so far, but New York is, I think, in process for.
Yeah, they just have implemented.
Yeah, I'm not totally accurate, but yeah, and in fact, it's a useful connection for us because.
Same with Massachusetts and most of the New England states. It's also been helpful to make that connection for youth that are placed in out-of-state placement, so that if they're struggling, then we can also connect with our same office there and see what change we can make.
There's a Vermont youth, it's like the reverse of that situation.
Yeah.
There's a Vermont youth incarcerated in another state, and we've talked to the advocate and actually need to reach back out in that state to be the boots on the ground, sort of to check in on the youth, et cetera, because it's hard for us to get there. So.
Thank you.
Thanks, yeah, we'll be around, at least I'll be around. I think you have to take off soon, but I'll be around since I was late especially. Thank you all.
Any other
If there are other questions, I just don't know.
Okay, great,
Thank you all.
Thank you, Matt, thank you, Lauren. Okay, next I want to invite up Nancy, and should I do Nancy and Claire, or just Nancy first? I'm sorry? Should I do Nancy and Claire, or Nancy first?
Where's Larry? I guess,
You were gonna go first?
yeah, I'll go first.
Okay, so I'm gonna invite up Nancy Miller, and Nancy, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the child safety manager for the Vermont, here, let me do this. Forgot I was wearing that. Nancy Miller is the child safety manager of Vermont Department of Children's and Families Family Service Division. And let's welcome her here today, thank you. And again, if you have questions, please write them down in your card, and when she's done speaking, we'll be able to engage in some questions.
Thanks, Sheila.
Yeah.
So, hi everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a little nervous. I'm just going to say that out front because when I say it out loud, it makes me less nervous. I'm going to introduce myself first. I do have some slides that I may, we'll see how things go. I think I may use the slides, I may not. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, my mom tells me all the time that I talk too quietly. I also don't have my glasses on, so I'm trying to read these. My name is Nancy, I use she, her pronouns. My position, child safety manager. I've been in my current position for the last 7 years. I've been with Family Services Division since 2006. I'm going to weave into my story talking about how I made it into working for Family Services Division. Well, first I'll tell you, I identify as a single mom of a 26-year-old trans female. My daughter just moved home after trying to live in Brooklyn for the last year. Brooklyn's a very expensive place to live, I can tell you, because I supported her for the last year. I'm very glad she's home, and we're trying to transition into living together in a very small apartment. I also identify as a daughter to an 87-year-old mom who I take care of. She lives below me. I live in the apartment in the attic. And what else do I want to say about that? I've been a caretaker for most of my life. I'm the youngest of 5 siblings. Grew up in, and we're recording this, so I'm not going to talk about my family too much because my mom might end up watching this, and I do live with her, so, I experienced some what my therapist would call small T trauma growing up, and which led to me dropping out of high school when I was almost through my senior year, but didn't quite get there because the trauma just kind of took precedent in my life at that time. So I spent about 10 years doing food service. And after about 10 years of doing food service, I decided that what I loved more than anything in the world was helping people. And that's why I like food service so much, because feeding people is helping people. But I wanted to make a little bit more money, and I wanted to do something besides carry heavy trays. I knew I couldn't do that forever. So I went back to college. When my daughter, who was then my son, was 3 or 4 years old, and went for a degree in social work. And I was at UVM pursuing a degree in social work, and I found out about something called the Title IV program, which is a program where federal money pays for 2 years of college in exchange for a 3-year commitment working for the State Child Protection Agency. And I didn't know anything about child protection work at that time, but I was very excited to have 2 years of my tuition paid for. So I signed up for that program, and went to work for DCF in 2006. I started out as a juvenile services worker, and I did that for about a year working with teenagers. I will mention this because I think it becomes a little bit important in a minute. Some of that trauma that I experienced as a teenager was the loss of 3 of my best friends to suicide in a 4-year period. And for that reason, working with teenagers was what I thought was my passion, but when I started doing that work, I realized I couldn't do it. It was too hard for me to try to help teenagers directly. I had no boundaries, and I said yes to everything, because I just wanted them to be happy all the time. I got moved over into the child abuse investigations part of the work. And I actually really, I know this is going to sound weird, but I really enjoyed that work. And I stayed working in that realm for the majority of my career, and that's where I landed in the position I am now as a child safety manager. One of the things that I love the most about the work that I do is the challenge of ensuring or trying to help kids be safe when bad things are happening in their homes, and balancing that with the rights of families to live their lives free from government intervention. That is a very, very challenging balance, and it is the challenge that I've always really appreciated about the work. And it's what keeps me in the work. I'm a little bit of a control freak, and I'm afraid that if I leave, whoever else does it won't do it right. Not to say I do it right, but I think it's that continual striving towards trying to get it right that I do really appreciate about the work. So why am I here today? Oh wait, rewarding, I said heartbreaking. I will say one of the things I do in my role, I provide consultation to the field, and some of the most challenging cases in the state are brought to me, and I review all fatalities. So anytime a report is made to our child protection hotline that gets accepted, or even ones that don't get accepted where a child has died, I review those cases. And sometimes I kid myself about how thick my skin is. I don't think it's as thick as I think it is, and that work can be pretty heartbreaking. So why am I here today? I'm here today because about a week ago, Larry told me I was coming here today to talk to you. And I told him he was wrong, and he said, no, you're wrong, and you were definitely going to be speaking there. So I do what Larry tells me, and Larry does what I tell him, and sometimes that works. So I don't want to talk too much about what I've been working on, but I guess what I can talk about, I do have some slides. I'm going to get to them in a minute because they're going to make sense with Larry's presentation. But, always striving to ensure that we are getting it right is something that I want to say all of us who work for DCF feel that way. And my colleague, I'm going to point out my colleague Lindsay Aaron, who is here with me tonight. She is our policy advisor.
Policy and planning manager.
Policy and planning manager, thanks.
You can call me what you want.
And I call her my very good friend a lot of the time. We talk a lot about our work, and in the being in central office means that we spend a lot of time thinking about our policies and how do we support the field to do the work in a way that gets it right. And it's, the work, it's not lost on us. The power and the impact of Family Services Division on people's lives. And so we take it very, very seriously. And I do think I will move to the slides now, otherwise I'm just going to ramble. And this should be all set to go. Okay, I'm gonna sit for a while and look at the slides. So, one of the things that we really want to get right is.
Not yet.
Is.
the only option.
Okay. Is this thing called the Child Protection Registry? How many of you are familiar with the Child Protection Registry?
They tried, but we're not on it, but they tried to. We're not.
You're not on it, but they're
No. I don't know.
Is it title page?
There, I wonder
It
if
is,
the
but,
projector's on.
yeah, we have to go. Let's see. It's on, it has to go to source. Or maybe I have to look it up. Now, let's see what happens here. It takes a moment.
Okay. So, so Larry and I have been working together, and Lindsay also, on part of this group, or this called the Children's Justice Act Task
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?
Force. Sure, the Children's Justice Act Task Force.
Let's see, okay, I think we're getting closer. It just took a little while.
What do we
Couple
think,
more
lights
months.
off?
Is that,
No, that's not you.
that's not my,
But some good people.
That was your family.
okay. All right.
Can folks see, or do we want to try turning lights off to make that more visible?
We can turn the lights down a little bit.
That's as far as the dimmer will go, so the next option is off.
One question.
Yep.
I advanced just with a
Just a-
mouse click.
Yep.
Got it.
I don't think that you, I think you could just tap it, I don't think
Yeah.
you have to look at. So the Child Protection Registry, I don't know if I should say.
Nancy, do you want us to turn the lights off?
And if people are comfortable with that.
Okay, we'll turn them off when you tell us.
Okay, because to,
People then will be able to hear you, even if they can't see you, they'll be able to hear you.
yeah,
Is that okay with
I
folks?
can see that much.
Okay.
Perfect. So, within the Children's Justice Act Task Force, for the last handful of years, we've been talking about the Child Protection Registry and what is needed to have it be a more fair and balanced part of the system that serves Vermonters better. Go ahead and tap.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, so why now? Like, why are we talking about child protection registry reforms now? Well, one is continuous quality improvement. As I said before, it is not lost on us, sort of the power and impact that the division has on people's lives. And every child protection agency in the country is both federally mandated, but then also has their state programs to continually look at the quality of our work and strive to improve it. Nationally, there is a conversation happening in almost every state in the country right now about child protection registries and whether or not they are serving the function that they were designed to serve. And as I mentioned, the CJA Task Force, many of you are familiar with Larry, and Larry's organization, the Vermont Parent Representation Center, published a couple of reports in the last 4 or 5 years that were a critical analysis of the Child Protection Registry and how it was operating. And so all of these things sort of culminated for us in the division to look at what should we be doing in Vermont to ensure that the Child Protection Registry is serving Vermonters in the way that it was intended to. We know that the time is right. We're at a point in history where we understand that the intersectionality between structural racism, socioeconomic oppression, intersect with child protection registries that perhaps are continuing those structures of oppression. And we want to understand it better, and we want to get it right. So how did we get here? So way back, prior to 2007, placement on the Child Protection Registry had minimal consequences for those who were substantiated. Back then, the registry was used only for internal purposes, like foster care licensing and federal reporting. In 2007, access to the registry was expanded, creating employment consequences for those who were substantiated. And then the Commissioner's Registry Review Unit process was created to address due process for those substantiated in light of that expanded access to the registry. So this is the scope of the impact. These are the numbers of registry checks. So I'll just explain briefly. A registry check, and this is what I meant in the earlier slide about employment consequences. The Child Protection Registry is basically a list of people who have been substantiated for abusing or neglecting a child. And that information is not accessible to the public in like the sex offender registry. Like a regular citizen can't just go online and access the Child Protection Registry. But agencies and organizations that serve vulnerable populations, so children, elderly, adults with disabilities, those organizations and agencies can contact the Department for Children and Families to find out if an employee or an applicant has their name on the registry. And then the department is obligated by law to share when that person was substantiated and the general category of abuse that they were substantiated for. And then these numbers over here on the right, these are just the number of checks. So these employers can access an online account or they can submit a paper form. And in 2022, the total number of checks of the registry was 57,722 times. So it's huge, right? That's a lot of checks for a state the size of Vermont. What is our population? 666,000, something like that. So we always talk a lot about our North Star in child protection because when working in child protection, we have to think about a lot of things at the same time, right? Like children's safety, parents' rights, the experience of families experiencing our system, what our staff needs, how our staff are, whether or not they're safe. So we have, we'll talk a lot about like, what is our North Star? We value child safety, and believe it or not, we do believe that most children are best protected by and cared for by their families. We value opportunity for children and families that we serve, and we strive to not limit opportunity and carefully consider the impacts of our involvement. And we want those that we serve, we want those families that we interface with to be better off because we interface with them. So what is the purpose of substantiation? What is the purpose of the Child Protection Registry? It's really important to keep in mind that substantiating someone for abuse or neglect has little to no impact on the immediate safety of the child in that home. That is not the purpose of substantiating. The only function served by substantiating is related to future child safety and ensuring those who should not have access to vulnerable individuals are prevented from having those opportunities. So it's in state law, it's in statute that the department has the obligation to maintain the registry and balance the employment impact of those on the registry with the mandate to also utilize the registry to provide for child safety in the community. Daycares, nursing homes, hospitals, schools. So that balancing act is not easy, it's challenging, and we know that the time is right to look at whether or not we're hitting that balance, and we know that we're not. We know that there are people on the Child Protection Registry who do not necessarily pose a risk to children in the community or in a daycare, nursing home, school, etc. This is the question that we have to ask. Are the future means served by placement on the registry so great that they warrant the impact that placement will have on that individual and often their children? So what are we doing about it? Trying to go through these kind of quickly. So we're redesigning our training. We partner with a Child Welfare Training Partnership that is an organization within the University of Vermont, and they design and implement all of our trainings, and we're working really closely with them to redesign the training for all new social workers, but particularly the one that I'm involved with is the redesign for investigating and assessing child safety. We are looking very closely at designing and implementing a centralized substantiation review process. So right now, the decision to substantiate is made by a family services worker and their supervisor in their district. And then that decision goes directly to the CRRU and potential name placement on the registry. And there are, 12 district offices in the state of Vermont, and decisions can be made differently in different offices. And there are a lot of things that can impact how decisions are made. Training, skill, experience, culture, workload, how busy somebody is. There's a high workload demand in family services, and so a lot of those things can impact how those decisions are made. And so what we're looking at is having a centralized layer of review so that those decisions can perhaps be more consistent and have a layer of involvement at the central office level. And actually we're looking at like a peer, I don't know how many details you want about this, but we're looking at perhaps like a peer-driven model so that supervisors from around the state could potentially take turns being on that review panel so that it's not necessarily top-down, but more of like a peer learning process that would really be serving like a quality assurance and consistency need. Another thing we're looking at is secondary considerations. And I don't know if that's the best title, but right now we don't differentiate between whether or not the person did the thing, right? The abuse or neglect allegation, whether or not they did that thing, and then if they did do that thing, does that actually mean that they're a risk in the community? Like we don't have, that's the secondary consideration, is that are they truly a risk to the community? So we don't have that in Vermont. We're just looking at, does a reasonable person believe, because that's our current burden of proof, reasonable person standard, does a reasonable person believe that this parent or alleged perpetrator did this thing or not? So we're really looking at how can we assess the risk to the community? And there are 14 other states in the country who are doing that in a variety of different ways, and so we're going to explore that more deeply in Vermont. The other option for system improvement is raising the standard of evidence from the reasonable person standard to a preponderance of the evidence, and I'm sure Larry might tell you a little bit more about that, so I'll let him take that one. And expanding the timeframes for administrative review. That Commissioner's Registry Review Unit due process layer that I talked about earlier, that has some short timeframes, and we're looking at expanding those, and I'll let Larry take that one too and explain that in a little bit more detail.
Well,
that's all I got. That's it.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah. You can turn the lights back on.
The symbol above, category was it? Preponderance. It looks like a digestive tract.
We were trying to
We were trying to figure out what it was.
No, that was me this afternoon before I got in my car, like trying to condense like hour-long presentation.
We won't tell you what Lindsay brought it.
Well, thank you for listening. I'll answer any questions. I'll try if you have any.
So again, if anybody has any questions, or if you want to put them on your index cards, that's good too. Questions, comments, curiosities? Anybody?
Well, I'm just concerned still to this day, why they tried putting us on there, but we weren't substantiated. I wasn't even allowed to read it. The father was allowed to read it.
When you say read it, what is the it?
The applications, and they were weird, like out of TV or something. Like something you might be in prison for. But we're not even substantiated. And I wasn't allowed to read it. It sounds crazy, like you said though, they want me to sound crazy, that's what I think. So why weren't we substantiated if it was so bad?
I don't know. I don't know anything about your case.
I know, I'm so concerned, it's never left my brain, you know? My kids were not afraid of us. They weren't afraid of father. Are you in the Brattleboro office?
No.
Oh. I don't remember what else to ask,
You can always come back. Anybody else have any, Allison?
Hi. That's really cool. I like the, the second chance kind of deal. I hope that, hearing what I had to say about, being potential risk and stuff, like, it'll be considered. I was substantiated because I was married at the time, and helping, my husband here, get his, our child, into our life, and they used my history of being in custody as substantiation and not be able to be proper, which is wrong. So hopefully that can be considered going forward with other people. They won't be considered a risk or a hazard to society because they were in a home. When they were a kid, definitely not right.
Thank you for sharing.
I have hope. Thank you for some hope here. And systems change. I'm sorry, I want to cry. I am incredibly happy to hear that you're working on a centralized process. I have seen time and time again, I've gone into court with families where that parent who grew up in foster care, and I've heard people say horrible things to these parents. One I know self-reported because she relapsed, self-reported and had her kids taken away. Like there's no work, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I have seen time and time again, because of how small our communities are, it's like everybody knows everybody and everybody knows everybody's business because it's a rural thing, And I just see so much bias, especially around poverty and race and families. Oh, it's that family. Oh yeah, they're, and I know that's very much a kind of rural culture. So please, and thank you I hope you are very successful with that because everybody just lives so close to each other and knows each other, yeah. And there's lots of biases around that, just by, the fact that these are all small communities. So the other thing I just want to, in terms of the secondary consideration, is that, in order for you to do that, is that something that has to be a statute changed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we can potentially have rulemaking, so there's statute and then there's legislative rules, and so we could do that through a rule change.
Thank you.
I just have a question, if you can clarify. Is a parent substantiated only if rights are terminated, or a parent can be substantiated, while they're in process to reunify?
That's a good question. So the termination of parental rights is something that occurs through CHINS proceedings, and the substantiation is separate from that. And so a CHINS proceeding may or may not stem from a child abuse investigation that has a substantiation at the end. A CHINS proceeding can come from an assessment or an investigation, and so the two may not be like connected. You know, does that make sense?
Ms. Nancy, if I can add, termination of parental rights happens in court.
Yes.
Substantiation happens within ECF. It's
Right.
two separate tracks, although often the facts are the same facts that are used in each instance.
But so are there cases then, I guess is my question, where children have been reunified, but their parent is now, like when you talk about the future of their child, there are parents then that are on this list that have been reunified with their children, but you've substantiated them.
That is true, and then there are also people
I don't
who...
mean you, I mean.
No, I there are also people who are substantiated and lose employment opportunities whose children were never removed.
Right.
So it's like they're not part of the same system. In fact, they're governed by two different statutes. So one is Chapter 51 and the other is Chapter 49, and they're not really connected. And I know that sounds really weird.
Yeah.
But Vermont has a differential response system. So when reports are accepted by our child protection hotline, they can either be accepted as an investigation or an assessment. And it is only investigations that where the worker has to make a determination at the end to substantiate or not. But either an assessment or an investigation can lead to a CHINS petition. It can get really complicated, and I could talk about it.
Yeah, it just seems like, I guess, for my 2 cents, okay, it seems like what you're saying, right, there should be some sort of overseeing on, specifically if a child hasn't been removed, but they've been substantiated. It seems like, I don't know, it just seems wonky.
Well, and so we utilize, go down this path just a little bit. So we utilize structured decision-making around when we make a decision to either ask a family to safety plan with us, or if we can't safety plan, utilize court as an intervention. And that should only ever be done when we identify a danger. And how danger is identified is not completely aligned with how cases are substantiated. Like cases can be substantiated for like far lesser, I don't know what the word is, far lesser concerning incidents, if you will. To ask a family to safety plan, or if that, or to utilize court and removal of a child, those should be reserved for like the most intensive like situations where there's imminent danger. And so the allegations of child abuse and neglect that result in a substantiation may not rise to that level. So that's one of the reasons why I don't necessarily advocate that they should be completely aligned, because they serve two different purposes. The substantiation, like I said, really serves the purpose of community safety, like child cares, nursing homes, schools. We want to make sure that there are not people working in those settings who are truly a risk to children in the community. Whereas the CHINS petition is really about what is happening for the child or children who are the subject of that report, who are in that home, and it's really about that home and that private family. It's not about the community. So they're really two different purposes between the CHINS and the court and the child protection industry. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I semi-understand that, that's okay, and I don't want to take up too much time. I think just real quick, the confusing part for me is that there are people that are substantiated who might be a risk to the greater community, but have their children, and so I guess that's the part that seems confusing to me. Yeah, that's it.
Your point is well taken.
I guess I have like, I don't know, not necessarily a concern, but a comment that is kind of like a concern. Like, I understand this and that in the law book, and I understand the laws quite well. But what I'll never understand is how it enables the violation of human rights that I'll never understand. You know what I mean?
I'll address some of that when I do my piece.
Are there any curiosities, questions, or more comments from the audience? Okay, Larry, come on up. Thank you, Nancy.
You want to do the honors?
Yeah. And would you like us to take down the lights as well?
I don't know, you can see this okay?
Can people see this okay? If we just did, okay. Can people see this okay? Okay, so we'll leave the lights on. Might be a little awkward for Nancy to be the dark one. Right, hey, each to their own. But that's so Larry from the Vermont Representation Center. So yes, take it away.
Thank you, I'll do this quickly. He, him, I'm here because I've been here before. I knew that there would be people here I hoped I'd see again. I'm very impressed with the work that you guys have been doing for years here. I think I was first here 5 years ago, maybe. And also I'm here because Sheila put on the agenda that there would be cookies. And as you may have noticed, I made 1 or 2 trips to the cookie plate. I got into this work, I was tricked into it. I'm retired twice, and I was asked to go to lunch with an old friend who said that he was on the board of a nonprofit and they were having problems, and he'd like to pick my brain to see about solutions, and we had lunch, and 2 hours later he says, okay, so do you want the job? And I said, what job? And he said, well, we're looking to hire a new director, and we want you to come in and take all of the information we've gathered in working with families and with DCF and write a report. And I said, okay, that sounds like a quick, easy job. That would be great. After 6 months of reviewing the data, I went back to the board of directors and said, I can't write a report based on your data because I don't believe your data is accurate. I worked in this system previously, and it's not as bad as you depicted it in your data. But to be fair, I want to start working with families for a while I'm also working with the data. Another 6 months later, I met with the board and said, I told you your data was wrong, and it is, because the system's worse than you described it as being. That was 7 years ago. So, in the ensuing 7 years, I've worked with several thousand families in Vermont, going through various aspects of the system, with a real focus on not just helping the families, but helping the families as a way of understanding the systemic problems. Because it's a systems problem. It's not a people problem. It's not like there's a bad person somewhere who makes all these decisions. It's a system that results in certain outcomes. And it's a system that is really, in many ways, based on past history. When this system was first created, it was really created to do 2 things. Tell the federal government how much abuse and neglect there might be, and make sure that someone who abused a child or neglected a child was not given a license or a registration by the state. That was it. Nobody else, no employer could ever see the list of who had been substantiated. It was purely to decide whether the state should give a license or not give a license for child care or for foster care. As was pointed out by Nancy in 2007, the legislature, in its wisdom, said, no, this should also be available to employers. It's not fair that only the state knows who people are who abuse children. What about schools? What about a whole host of other entities? Unfortunately, when that change was made, there wasn't a recognition that all of a sudden we went from a system that didn't violate constitutional rights to a system that in fact took constitutional rights away from people, which is what the current system does, because you have a right to freely associate. You have a right to employment. You don't have a right to a specific job, but you have a right to pursue a career unless you have broken the law somewhere. The system, as it currently exists, operates with really an antiquated mentality. Nowhere in the statute and nowhere in policy, correct me if I'm wrong, Nancy, because every now and then I am wrong, and she corrects me. Nowhere in the laws or the policies or the rules does the word evidence appear. Evidence doesn't exist. No, it doesn't. Now, Lindsay may educate me better than that because she's the real policy person, but I've gone through them and I haven't found the word evidence that I can identify. It's because you don't need evidence for the reasonable person standard. How many people in this room think you're a reasonable person? Show of hands. Okay. Now, a question. How many people in this room think if we put out a problem to this group that everyone is going to agree on the solution to the problem? And that's the problem with a reasonable person standard. It's not really based on evidence. It's based on a sense of, well, here's all the information. What do I think? What does a reasonable person think? That's different than actually producing a preponderance of the evidence, which is what you need to have when you go to court, and in fact take away someone's rights, in essence. That sets up a system where you can have, as has been described, you can get different decisions. The same issue could be looked at in 12 different districts and you might get a different response. You won't get 12 different responses, but you'll get a few different responses. And the question is it just the luck of the draw that you wind up living in a district where they don't think that a reasonable person would believe this, whereas in another district, a reasonable person would believe that. So, what that led to was, from my perspective, an effort to try to figure out and test the system and see, does the system really work? And my expectation in testing the system, and this is really an honest expectation, we decided to take a certain number of substantiation cases, take them randomly, no cherry picking, no selection of cases. No case was turned down. Take the appeals. I fully expected to lose every appeal. Because when I first came to Vermont 45 years ago, it was my job to work in the system and review those kinds of things. And what I found as we began the test was that we weren't getting the outcome I expected. We were having these substantiations overturned, consistently overturned. That then caused me to say, what is it that's wrong with the system that we're getting these kinds of results? Now, that's been raised for a while, a number of years. But just having that information wasn't enough. Because, as Shela said earlier, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to change a system. So you can have people outside of the system trying to change it, but if people in the inside of the system don't recognize that those problems are real, it's never going to change. We are incredibly fortunate at this point in time to have Commissioner Chris Winters, who is the new commissioner at the Department of Children and Families, new about a year now, I guess, who has looked at this information and said, there is a problem here. And we are incredibly fortunate to have managers within DCF who have done the same thing. And that's the reason that we have worked, I think, so closely together over the last 3 or 4 years in setting the stage for this. But we needed to have a leader at the top who would say, yes, There is a problem. Let's be honest about it. Let's address it. Let's try to figure out solutions. We're at that point now. Everything isn't worked out by any stretch of the imagination, but we are closer than we've ever been to taking an antiquated system and make it more applicable to today's world. So, in that line, there are 2 bills in the legislature right now. This is where this group of people come into play, because this is politics. This is what it's about. It's about deciding how do we want our laws to reflect what our values are. So, there are 3 basic categories of things that are being addressed in this legislation. The first is changing the standard of proof. That is huge, because it's no longer the reasonable person. It's a preponderance of the evidence. Is there more than 50% of evidence to say this happened? If there isn't more than 50%, then the person should not be substantiated, because there isn't sufficient evidence. It also gives us much greater consistency, because you can measure, in a weird way, 50+%. You can't measure reasonable person, as we all know, because we're all reasonable people and we all disagree with one another on different issues. It is a little different when you start weighing evidence. You at least have a numerical figure to work with. The second is to improve the investigation process, how investigations are done. And that's critical, because the evidence that's gathered isn't just, in an investigation, shouldn't be just the evidence that says, lary.crist, you did it. It should be the evidence that says, well, this is what we see that looks like you did it, but here's also the evidence that indicates that you didn't do it. Because that's what an investigation is supposed to be. An investigation isn't a prosecution. Its purpose is to gather information, gather evidence, and then weigh that. As opposed to saying, well, I really think that, yes, a reasonable person to say you did it, but it doesn't matter what evidence says you didn't, I feel like you did. Now, that's an oversimplification in some way, but that's kind of the way the system works. And the last piece of that, the 3 legs of that stool, is improving the appeal process. Okay, next one. And just so you know, mercifully, there are only 6 slides. So, although my slides are not as cool looking as Nancy's were. So, we have 2 bills. One is House Bill 327, which has been offered by the department for several years now. It's been pending, and it proposes some changes to the current system. Then there's House Bill 661, which used to be called House Bill 169 originally. If folks say, what happened to 169? 169 really became 661. It was rewritten, cleaned up, so that it reads much easier. That basically has been offered by BPRC. Now, many of the elements in these bills overlap. Where there is some difference is where the department might say something should be done this way, the BPRC bill says, no, maybe it should be done this other way. That's going to be part of the debate in the legislature. But the 2 bills have many elements in common and some that are different. The department's bill has some elements that we didn't put in our bill because they're purely administrative and how the department would like to operate, which we didn't feel like impacted on substantiations particularly. And there are some pieces in our bill that the department has problems with, but this is an ongoing discussion. And we are continuing to work through these issues and figure out where can we compromise and where maybe we can't compromise. So far, we haven't gotten to any hard places where we're saying can't compromise, except one, but I won't mention that one. But that's part of this process. It is, it's really an integrated process where no one is saying, hey, the system's fine, don't change it. Everybody acknowledges that there are real problems that need to be fixed, and this is an opportunity to do that. Okay. And I should also add that the department, it's not just DCF and BPRC. The department has put together a much broader process involving many more people discussing these specific issues so that we can gather as much information as possible. And that is a giant step by the department. It's the first time with regard to these issues that the department has been willing to do that, and in fact has done a very good job of it, I believe. Okay, next slide. All right, House Bill 661, and I'm going to talk specifically about this, and then just so you know, I have copies of both bills that I can give you electronically, which can then be distributed and people can access them different ways. I don't want to present the department's bill because it's the department's bill, but you can compare the two, and the department's bill is actually shorter, smaller than BPRC's bill. So basically for House Bill 661, which is, it really changes from reasonable person standard to preponderance of the evidence. Which means the evidence must be greater than 50% for a substantiation. Investigations must be thorough and unbiased. Now, I think there have been tons and tons of investigations that have been thorough and unbiased. But there isn't really a direct statement that says this is the way they're supposed to be. And so anytime you have a large number of people doing a particular job, if you don't have real clarity as to how they should do the job, you run the risk of having outlying decisions that just shouldn't happen that way. This basically says and I guess this comes back full circle, it's not a prosecution. An investigation is an investigation. You gather as much information as you can to make an informed decision by weighing the evidence that you gather. Key interviews should be recorded. The reason I raise that and what we're referring to as a key interview is that there's an interview and someone says, I saw this happen, and that's what they tell the department. And the department then moves forward on a substantiation saying, this person said they saw what happened. Then you go and interview that person and they say, I never said that. I didn't say that. Now, maybe they did say that, and maybe now they've changed their mind. That puts the department in a difficult position. Or maybe they didn't say it, and the investigator misconstrued what was said. That puts both parties in a difficult position. So the idea of recording key interviews is to say, well, now we know exactly what you said. You may want to clarify it now, but this is what you told the department, one way or the other. That people who are identified as witnesses need to be interviewed. The department, and I could be wrong, the department intends for that to happen, I think, based on the policies that are there, but it doesn't specify it. So you'll sometimes find situations where someone says, I was the only one interviewed in my home. There are 5 other people who could have supported what I said, but they weren't interviewed. Only I was interviewed. The policies indicate that if other witnesses are identified, they should be interviewed. And that's part and parcel of making sure you gather as much information as possible. This bill specifies if other people are identified, they need to be interviewed. And an improved notification system. Currently, people are notified of their substantiations by first-class mail. There are some well, that's the way it originally was some 40 years ago, or 50 years ago. Because there wasn't a whole lot that you were concerned with if you got substantiated. Now, it's really important to know that you've been substantiated, because if you don't know you've been substantiated, you can't appeal in time. And if you can't appeal, then you are substantiated without any opportunity to prove your innocence. So the bill deals with improving the notification system. Okay, next slide. All right, so basically the improvements to the review process. Today you have 14 days. This one I always like. You have 14 days in which to register your appeal for a commissioner's review. That's the first appeal step in this process. 14 days. The question still exists, is it 14 days from the date on the letter? Is it 14 days from the date the letter is postmarked? Or is it 14 days from the date that you've received the letter? You can have 3 different dates there. If you only have 14 days within which to do it, and it takes the mail 2 days, 5 days, 7 days to get to you, then you're kind of stuck. So we are in the process of, the bill says it should be 30 days. You should have 30 days from, and we still have to clarify what date. That's still an issue. And you may think, well, that's an easy one to do. No, it's not. Because if it's the date of the postmark, the department has no idea what date the post office stamped that postmark. If it's the date on the letter may not have been mailed for a few days, and you have no way of being able to show that. So we're trying to work through 30 days from what? That's still, but we're looking at 30 days in the bill. We're looking at when you are substantiated for your first round of getting the reports that DCF uses, their investigative reports, getting those in an unredacted form. In other words, redacted form means you get a report, much information has been set up so that you can't read it. And that again stems to the way things were many years ago, but also relates to concerns about domestic violence and people being tracked, et cetera now. This says for you to have a fair review, you need to know what you're charged with. On the other hand, if you are the victim of domestic violence or other kinds of threats, then there ought to be exceptions so that that information isn't available to whoever may want to get it. Currently, the law says that the department shall hold a review within 35 days of the day that you ask for the review. To my knowledge, the department has never been able to do it within 35 days. I have not seen a case yet that where 35 days. The longest has been 18 months. But in all fairness, the department has worked to try to reduce that amount of time, and now it's about 90 days. That seems to be about the time frame in which people get their reviews. What we've said is that the review needs to be done within 90 days. Now, that could mean that it's begun in 90 days, but not completed in 90 days. So there is still room to work through that. House Bill 661 actually has a penalty that says that if the department doesn't hold it within 90 days, then the substantiation is eliminated. I don't know how long that will stay in the bill, because it really is holding state government accountable to meeting certain requirements. Frankly, the reason it's in there is because the current statute says that the department shall hold a review within 35 days. When I went to law school, shall meant you had to do it. It wasn't a may. However, the definition has been changed a bit, and there's one school of thought that says where government's concerned, the shall really is a may in some cases. This seems to be one of those. We just would like clarity as to if it's not shall, then what term should be in there that accurately reflects that there is flexibility. Okay, next one. And also, just so you know, the reason for the 90 days is because if you receive, it's almost impossible for someone to put together, to get the substantiation, to look at the reports, to then try to understand them, to try to figure out who can help you, to try to even find a lawyer if you have the money to hire them to help you, to do that in 35 days. It just isn't possible.
I did that all myself.
Yes. Most people wind up doing this themselves. We want to do.
We'll do questions. Okay. We'll do questions on that.
Okay, Okay, so this is now, has to do with the expungement process. You've been substantiated, and now you were told you have to wait a certain period of time to seek expungement, which means having the substantiation basically washed away. House Bill 661 deals with expungement, and what it has in it, particularly for expungement, there's some things that the department's asked for. DPRC agrees with those. Those are in 327. But these are things that we have experienced over time, and our feeling was that they needed to be in the bill for no other reason than to get recognized, because the average person would not know that if they were denied expungement for any of these things, that they shouldn't have been denied expungement. So, now I'll go through them quickly. I think this is the last, this may be the last slide, I think, I'm not sure. But, so, as an example, we've had cases, and these are all based on cases that we worked with, where people were denied expungement based on events that happened before the substantiation. Well, they were known to the department then. That should have been factored into the substantiation in determining when someone could apply for expungement. It's unfair to say to someone, you can apply for expungement in 2 years, and then you come back in 2 years for expungement, and the department says, oh, no, you did bad things before, and those preclude you from being expunged now. It should have been done on the front end. Because those events predated the original substantiation, unless it is new information. If you do something after you've been substantiated, and then you go back for expungement, the department has every right to say, well, no, you actually did some things after you were expunged, and after you were substantiated, and we don't think that you have really recognized those as things that you need to do. That the department can't deny you for not providing information that you were never asked for. And I know these seem really weird, but I promise you, these have all come up in cases we've worked with, and these have all been overturned by the Human Services. That a decision was, you had a drug problem, you didn't tell us about it during your expungement hearing. Well, they weren't asked about a drug problem. So the fact that they didn't offer it, how do they know what they're supposed to offer, what they're not supposed to offer? Especially when the information about a drug problem is already in the department's records and was there for anyone to look at if they wanted to review the records. And then could have asked questions about it, but didn't ask those questions. Or something that we saw that happened fairly frequently is that it was simply a statement, not enough time has passed. The problem is, when you're substantiated, the department gives you a period of time within which you have to wait and then come back. You can't be denied because not enough time has passed, if in fact the time has passed. It's not a subjective decision that someone says, well, I don't know, you're allowed to come back in 2 years, but I think you really should have waited 4 to prove that you're not going to do this. And as I said, and then the last one is just a misreading of departmental files, where a decision will be made based on the fact that you did X, Y, and Z when you go back and look at the department's files, and that's not really what they say. So each of these were common things that, I say common, they came up enough and were overturned at each point by the Human Services Board that we felt it was important for the department to be sort of put on notice that no, these things are not valid reasons for denying expungement. There are a lot of reasons to deny expungement, but not these. So, and I think that's the last slide, Nancy. Oh. Okay. Thank you. Okay, now I'll stand up for this one.
Oh, yeah.
What you have seen really is House bills, 2 House bills that are pending this legislative session. that you as individuals in this group need to become involved in. How do you become involved? What your decision is on whether to support or not support, that's up to you. But the fact is, this is our opportunity. When people talk about changing the system, this is how the system, we're at this point in changing the system. And let's say, miraculously, that the legislature changes the system this year. It's only one step in a process of reforming a larger system. In my mind, this is the biggest problem. This is a system whereby the state pays attorneys to represent families in Chin's cases, if you would, getting into family court. No one gets an attorney for substantiations. But a lot of the substantiations are based on information that is also used in family court to decide whether children should be removed, whether they should be removed permanently. In our experience, VPRC's experience is that in about 85% of the cases, the attorneys don't do their job. They don't represent people, they don't present evidence, they don't meet with their clients, they don't respond to phone calls. And it's not because they're bad people. It's because the state doesn't pay them enough to be able to do this work. This is a huge amount of work. So as an example, we jump back to substantiations. There are some substantiation cases where I and others have spent over 200 hours working on a case over a period of 1, 2, or 3 years. You multiply 200 hours by $250 an hour, which is really cheap for an attorney, and you see how much it would take to be able to handle one case. These attorneys are not paid enough to spend the time. They don't have the resources to hire people to do the investigations. They can get some resources, but not to the extent that we need them. It's not going to be until people have adequate representation that two things happen. First of all, the right outcomes occur in court, and the department is assisted in understanding how this process works. Because it really isn't about parents versus the department. It's parents dealing with a system that is based on evidence. And if your attorney doesn't present any evidence, then you're sunk. And that's their job. Now, that system doesn't even involve the department. DCF has nothing to do with this system. This has to do with the Defender General's office, it has to do with the court system, it has to do with state's attorneys and how that interaction occurs. So the last piece of this that I'll say is this. Some of you in this room have had this experience of having an attorney who represents you. You go on for a number of months, sometimes 6 months, whatever, and then the attorney says, look, just plead to the merits, stipulate to the case, and then do what DCF tells you and you get your child back. That is not effective representation. Your attorney's job is to figure out how to present the best case they can for you. Now, maybe your case is in such shambles that that is the best advice. But the reality is all of the incentives for attorneys to do that are all monetary. Because if they get rid of your case quickly with a minimum of work, they get paid the same as if they spend a ton of time working on these cases. And they can't afford to do that. So it's not that they're bad attorneys, it's that the system, again, is set up. This needs to happen, not this year, but it needs to happen next legislative session. And groups like this are going to be absolutely instrumental in getting both of these issues, substantiation in the registry and legal representation, reformed. Without you, this is never going to happen. So, okay.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to acknowledge that it's 7:30, but we're going to extend time. Those of you who have to leave, I respect that. But we're going to extend the event a little bit longer because we are filming, and this information is crucial for people who are not able to be in the audience today. So I'm going to take some questions for Larry right now,
And then I'm going to read some of the things that were up there. Then I'm gonna ask the presenters to come up for one last moment, and then we're going to be done. I'm gonna try to do this all in the next 15 minutes, so if people can hold out for 15 minutes, I would really, really appreciate that, and I really respect, I know some people have hours of travel time ahead of them, so, but I wanna respect everybody who showed up in multiple ways. So questions for Larry? Anybody have any questions? Concerns, ideas, curiosities?
My strange case, for example, like, I found out years later that, like, there had been information withheld from the court that highlighted how, like, the family they chose for my stepchild wasn't really a choice. You know what I mean? Like,
It's hard to address a given situation without completely understanding it. In that instance, if it was information that somebody purposely withheld, then there needs to be, well, I don't know how we deal with those, other than the fact that if you have good representation, that's something that they need to be on top of early on to determine, wait a minute, this is not a good placement, or to ask the kinds of questions that need to be posed that a parent can't often ask because they don't have the positioning to be able to ask them. So, you know, as an example, in a recent case that I was involved in, the child's attorney, the guardian ad litem, had real concerns about placement that was being put forth. And the placement turned out not to be a good placement. But the system worked the way it was supposed to, it just didn't give us the right outcome. Other instances are, there is information that's withheld. And those issues need to be raised at some point, either within, if it's the department that did that, some system in the department to be able to address those kinds of issues. If it was in the courtroom, then there needs to be a system that can do that in the courtroom. But right now, the system is so scattered. The attorneys who represent you work for themselves and for you, because they don't really answer to anyone else. They're not supervised by the Defender General's office. There is training that's offered to them, but they're not required to take it. So what needs to happen, and I'll be back here next year with another presentation of what a model system looks like that are being used all around the country now. And the federal government pays for most of it. Vermont has chosen so far not to, for a variety of reasons, not to initiate that system. But all of those reasons can be overcome with time. I mean, let's face it, if other states can do it, Vermont should be able to. We're small enough that we should be able to do some of these things. Because we should.
you're right, a lot of things need to be changed, including like people signing away their rights when they think they're signing for their freedom.
Yes, and that's another piece of this, where there is no oversight as to what it is you're signing. As an example, your attorney says, look, sign here, you're not admitting to anything. And I'm not making this stuff up. This happens, these are cases that we see all the time. When in fact you are admitting that you abused or neglected your children. But there is no place to go to be able to raise that in a timely fashion so that it can be undone. The system's not designed for that kind of quality assurance. It needs to be. And other states have it. We don't yet.
And one last thing, I remember when I was an adolescent in the system, like, I remember this program well, it was great. The reunification program, that seemed to have disappeared. I used to have a representative that would be like a middleman to talk to you and your parents and like get you guys comfortable again, you know, to get you on the road to going back home. And it doesn't exist anymore because of that unique case with, you know what I'm talking about and where it all changed.
Actually, I'm not familiar with it, but
There's two boys long story short, they don't believe in, they don't feel safe, like, any kids going home after what happened to those 2 kids. You know, they went back home and they didn't make it ever since. You know, for the own reasons, and in the Garden Line and the caseworker were against the placement to begin with, but it was all used as an example to show how your reunification wasn't safe. And then that's when they started, everything changed, everything.
Well, I can't speak for the department. It's, everything that we're talking about here is labor intensive. There's nothing here that's automated, it shouldn't be automated. But the state has not, you could say the same thing about the mental health system for children. The state has not maintained the services that it once had, and now the problem is even larger because we're in a deeper hole. But I think that the only way that I know to approach these things is through systems change, to make the systems work and then demand the resources that are needed to keep them working. That's a simplistic approach, but I don't know how else to do it.
Well, you're doing an amazing job. Thank you so much, Larry, for your time and information.
If you could only see behind the curtain.
I have. I've seen on the other side of the door. I've seen it all. And I can tell you that I can't appreciate you for existing or even caring much more because, like, I was one of those children left behind and just to see someone still doing the work, trying to make a better place, you know, and never gave up on that dream.
Well, thank you, but you guys are the ones who do this. It's not me. You know, it's not the department. It's you guys in the end and your continual work to hold the system accountable to do the right thing and help it identify what is the right thing. Because none of us have a crystal ball. I'm sorry.
So I just have a couple of questions.
If they're hard, Nancy's going to answer them.
Is the substantiation, and I know I'm saying the word not clear, but is that a list just for Vermont or is that across the country?
It is kind of both. It is just for Vermont, but I believe people from other states can, you know, employers are other states can access it.
No,
But they have to, it's not like they go onto a web page and you can dig it up from.
Right, like does just Vermont have this?
Oh, no.
Or every state has.
I think almost every state
This
does.
process
There may be
of
one or two that
substantiation.
doesn't. We're not quite sure how they do it by not having one. But yeah, every state has one of these, in part because the federal government, again, wants to know.
Right. And then how would the department address people who are giving key interviews who have a fear of retaliation?
That's a very good question for Nancy. You mean within this context?
I understand both
investigation?
sides, right? It's
Yeah.
like Sheila said, yes and, like, yes, it's great to have the key interviews so that there is that 50% evidence. But, you know, just like in any justice system, right, there are people who don't want to come forward out of fear. And so is there something, you know, within the bill that kind of protects those?
There are references in the bill to domestic violence and related, I don't remember what the terminology is, I should, but it is in there. And frankly, it was the department that raised that issue with me, and so we put it into the bill. That still may not be enough, because one piece I left out is that for the department's review, you get a redacted form, you get a redacted report. The moment you appeal to the Human Services Board, you get an unredacted version. And the reason is that you can't convict someone without telling them exactly what it is they did. That's the bottom. And therein lies the difference, where you could do reasonable person when it was just a licensing issue, because no one has a right to a license. You have a right to apply, you don't have a right to a license. You do have a right to employment, you do have a right to free associate, you do have a right to offer to volunteer at a school. And if you're substantiated now, you don't have that right any longer. So therefore, you basically have a right to know what is it I'm being accused of and who's accusing me. So, but I think, it'll be the challenge for the department, as it is now in some cases, to figure out how do you use information that you don't really want to. And there are ways to do that. It can be done. It doesn't happen often, but it can be done. The person might still have to testify, but it would be done in camera in some way. And you might just have attorneys who sit there and hear it, or whoever is representing.
I just have an old concern. My attorney, court-appointed attorney, was just gonna let me be put on that list without telling me. The only reason we were able to fight it is because Craig's court-appointed attorney was very good.
Good.
For a court-appointed, very good.
Now, in all fairness to the attorneys, there are some attorneys who only see their job being to deal with the Chin's case. That's what they're paid for. They're not paid to deal with substantiations, and in fact, in some cases, there are attorneys who don't know anything about the substantiation process.
Mine, she didn't, yes, oh, so she said I'm not a criminal attorney.
And that's why having a reform system would alleviate those kinds of things, because the attorneys would all be trained as to what it is you're supposed to say and how you balance these things out in dealing with Chin's case versus dealing with substantiation.
Is there any other questions?
I have one.
I don't want a question from that woman.
And this might be the last question of the night, unless anybody has anything burning. Okay, go ahead.
Number one, can we get your slides?
Yes, I will make the slides available, and as well as the two bills, so that.
Thank you.
And I can, what I'll do.
Again, why it's really important to sign up and leave a clear email.
Okay.
So I'll send it to you tomorrow.
Okay, and Nancy, if we could have yours as well? Would that be okay? Or
I
did you-
actually have to ask, I work in the state bureaucracy.
Oh,
And so
right, okay.
I didn't ask permission to distribute the slides, so I have to ask, but I will ask, and then I'll get back to Sheila.
Okay, great. And Larry, so obviously, all of us here are going to get up and say, okay, so tell us how do we, support this bill?
If I have worked with you, you will be getting an email.
Okay, great. Okay, so, and the last question is, are you already connected to lawyers who want to be a part, maybe give testimony or be a part of the reform for the
That
next?
is one of the reasons I'll be contacting you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So I want to invite Nancy and Matthew, could you both come up here, please?
We don't have to sing
And you,
names.
no, not saying that, if we all can stand up.
Okay.
So exactly going off of your point here, what I'd like everybody to do, the camera's over there, and one, I would like to get a picture, but then I also want you to look in the camera, and I want them to just say your name, what entity you're a part of, your contact information, whether that's a phone number or an email, and why would they contact you. So look over into the camera, which is right here, and I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
Okay?
Into that camera.
That's right.
Got it, okay. I'm lary.crist. I'm the director of the Vermont Parent Representation Center. You can contact me through email, Larry, Larry, .crist, and then the letters V as in victory, T as in Tom, P as in Paul, R as in Romeo, C as in Charlie.org. Or you can call the office at 802-540-0200. You can also go to our webpage and you can send a message through our webpage, www.vtprc.org.
Excellent. And some of the things you're working on is
Issues that you have in and working with and trying to understand the child protection system writ large, whether it's DCF, whether it's the court system, whether it's how to get your attorney to do their job. Also, what you need to do in working with your attorney so that they can do their job.
Great. My name is Shela Linton, her executive director of the Root Social Justice Center, supporter of Families United. Families United is familiesunited@therootsjc.org. Our website is therootsjc.org, and our phone number is 802-451-0509. And you can contact us if you're a most impacted person, meaning you have been impacted. You might be a parent, grandparent, you might be an auntie, you might be an uncle. If you have been a directed impacted person and you would like to join our Families United group, which is a peer support group, please contact us. And or if you need to be resourced out to other people, such as some people who are up here, or maybe some other connections or contacts that we have, please get in contact with us here at the Root as well.
My name is Nancy Miller. I am the Child Safety Manager of the Family Services Division. I can be reached at nancy.miller@vermont.gov. I'm trying to think, why would people want to reach out to me? If you have concerns you would like to share, I wouldn't suggest reaching out to me about case-specific concerns. For that, I would recommend that you contact the department's Consumer Concern Hotline, because I can't speak to specific cases. But if you do have ideas about balancing our approach to using the Child Protection Registry in terms of, in regards to child safety, if you want to talk about that, that would be a good reason to reach out to me.
My name is Matthew Bernstein. I'm a child, youth, and family advocate for the state of Vermont. You can get in touch with me at matthew.bernstein@vermont.gov. So that's I guess I would say for general feedback or questions. If you or someone you know would like assistance with an ongoing DCF matter, specifically probably in child welfare or juvenile justice, there's a couple different ways to get in touch with us for that purpose. You can email us at ocyfa@vermont.gov. You can leave a message at 802-828-2828. You can text, this is new, 802-312-1010. You can visit our website at childadvocate.vermont.gov. So that's child advocate, one word, CHILDADVOCATE. Just kidding. So sorry, we got caught up in this thought. Childadvocate.vermont.gov. So it's www.childadvocate.vermont.gov. Take three? No, that's good. I don't know. I think that's it. Thank you so much.
So before you all leave, Melanie and Allison, would you like to come up? Allison over here. I'd like to do a picture with you all and just like thank everybody. A little close. Allison, you come right on this side. What do I have? Right here. Perfect. You're perfect.
Just stand a little close up. There you go.
Great. Thank you, everybody. And we can break for this part, but Brian, I'm going to ask you, we're going to just turn over to here. And the last thing we'll do is close out with what was written up here. It says, what are your ideas for a better Vermont DCF? I believe a better structure for case plan development to prevent possible stagnation in a case. Better background checks on employees' mental health. Caseworkers that know the struggles of raising kids in a poor economics. Material support for families with no strings attached.
Amen.
Non-coercive support when people are struggling. Those are just some ideas that people put up on our sheets. What are your concerns with the system, Vermont DCF system? People's ability to use DCF and family court systems as a form of litigation abuse. The investigation process was dehumanizing and criminalizing. The risk assessment assessment questions are biased and make parents feel unsafe and feel like a setup. Constantly modifying a case plan regardless of progress. Their goals almost always is how quickly they can take kids regardless of how good the home is. And then their plan to build new cells to lock up kids, including in Brattleboro. They still want to lock up our kids. There are systems being built to currently lock up our kids. And again, those are what came up for what are better ideas and what are concerns. I want to thank you all for attending tonight's meeting and event. And as Larry said, it's about systems change. We are here to change the systems, and we are here to support the people who are impacted by those systems. So thank you everybody for attending tonight, and be safe and drive home, and remember, families united. Thank you everybody.